asset synchronization with the API manager and exchange. So this means that an organization that has API assets and soon API groups defined in the API manager will get periodically and automatically synchronized with our platform's concept of an asset. So this particularly simplifies onboarding if a customer has a bunch of APIs registered in the Anypoint platform. And then the final piece we have in terms of the just broader Salesforce ecosystem is integration with Salesforce CPQ. So this is for customers that want to manage their API-driven products the same way they manage the rest of their digital product portfolio. So this lets us, again, similar to the API manager functionality, automatically synchronize products from CPQ over to HyperCurrent. In terms of settlement, we have support with for third-party payment rails. So out of the box support for Stripe, roadmap support for Plaid, and then we have support for internal IT systems of record. So for the chargeback use cases that Jason alluded to, we could also integrate with things like Microsoft Dynamics or NetSuite for for broader integration with an IT financial ecosystem. Now, how do we get this data? Actually, I'm sorry, I see a question from Ken. So the short answer is yes. So we support essentially the whole ecosystem of the API gateway landscape. And the way that we do that is what I'm going to get to right now is our platform has a concept called a metering beacon. So the metering beacons are how we collect API transaction metadata from various API gateways. The metering beacons are architected as lightweight sidecars. So, from a hosting standpoint, we generally host the whole platform ourselves, but the metering beacons are flexible where they can be deployed either in our cloud or closer to customer premises or on premise. Again, these things are super lightweight, and what they act as is bulkheads that accept, again, API transaction metadata. These things buffer them and then periodically roll them up to a concept we have internally at HyperCurrent called a transaction engine. In terms of the Anypoint platform, I'll dive into this in a second, but we have a custom policy we put together that asynchronously wiretaps metadata from API transactions and then sends those to the metering beacon. And Jason, I think if you go to the next slide, that dives into that part of the architecture. So in terms of how the beacons actually capture the traffic, we have essentially 4 key concepts, and I'll talk about this or show you it when I show you the demo. But essentially, every downstream consumer who purchases an API gets something called a product key. So a product key is either a GUID that we generate, or it's potentially a client ID from the Anypoint platform. That is passed as a header into API requests. And our metering beacons and the custom policy will essentially look for that header, and we use that to correlate API client requests to products. In terms of how we identify that, every API in our platform has an API. It's called an API key, and this slide is a little bit dated. We call it it's an API ID now, just to avoid confusion with other kind of concepts. But the idea is that the custom policy either has the API ID associated with it for every API it's applied to, or we can infer the API ID from something like the URI of the request, assuming that's unique. And sort of the kind of takeaway from this is that within a few minutes, an organization can apply the HyperCurrent policy and then immediately start monetizing their APIs. And you can go to the next slide, Jason. Now, in terms of how we view HyperCurrent, ACM, and Salesforce, sort of playing, I shouldn't say playing well, but sort of the ideal way to think about the 3 platforms together is essentially the Anypoint Community Manager and Salesforce CPQ acting as kind of the front end productized API discovery and experience layer. And then HyperCurrent and the Anypoint platform as the fulfillment, metering, and chargeback layer. And then obviously HyperCurrent sort of sits in the middle of this and acts as kind of the mediation point between ACM, Salesforce CPQ, and the Anypoint platform. One slide I probably should have put in here, and I spaced on it, is also how you think about monetizing APIs in the broader system process experience landscape. So the general recommendation there is that experience APIs, just to kind of reuse the term I used earlier, provide the last mile for monetization. So in terms of the organizations that we're talking to now, almost universally, it's experience APIs that are being monetized. And then system and process APIs are kind of the candidates for internal chargeback. And then there's kind of a synergy in terms of how those two concepts play with each other in terms of pricing external APIs and that kind of stuff, which is probably a topic for a different meetup or conversation. But I think is that the last slide now, Jason? Or okay, yeah. And then the final piece is the ACM integration. So I'll show you this in depth when I go through the demo. But essentially, what we've done at HyperCurrent is build a series of lightweight web components that mirror some of the functionality within Anypoint Community Manager and Community Cloud. So specifically, we have LWCs that expose out API product data. We could show multiple API products in the form of a carousel. We have an API product details button. So the idea here is that with our customers, generally, if they want to procure access to an API, it needs to redirect them to some other page if there's commercial terms or something else. So the product details button facilitates those redirects. The create notification button allows things like Salesforce lead creation, Slack notification, et cetera, for potential customers who are interested in buying an API. Then we also have, for people who are logged into ACM, the ability to surface their purchases from something like HyperCurrent within their ACM experience. So for instance, an API consumer logged into ACM can see all the products that they've procured access to, and also see things like the quotas that they've consumed against those. And then what we're working on for near-term roadmap, so it looks like early Q1 next year, is showing more data in that vein. So things like viewing their invoices and other billing data as part of their ACM unified experience. All right, so now let me show everyone the software quickly, and if there's any questions, either interrupt me or you can put them in the chat, and I'll try to address in real time.
You're on mute, Jason, if you're talking. Sorry.
Double muted. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention as John transitioned that I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but we are HyperCurrent, our official MuleSoft partner. So it was announced around June of last year. There's a blog about the partnership on MuleSoft's website. And so if anybody's interested in learning more after this, we'll make sure just look us up on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I assume, yeah, my screen's sharing, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, so what I'm going to do is walk you through kind of foundationally the concepts of our platform, and then show you the user interface and then the integration points as I do that. So the base kind of concept in our platform is an asset, so kind of very similar to the Anypoint platform. Assets in the HyperCurrent world are generally APIs, but they could also be API resources. So some of the organizations that we're working with monetize either different verbs of an API differently, or might have a single kind of entry point and then monetize different URIs. So the API resource asset type, let's cover that. As an aside, from a policy application perspective on the MuleSoft side, if you're using the API resource asset type, you'd apply our policy to the API resource level on the API manager. We also have support, and frankly, we're not seeing a lot of this, but one of our customers asked for support to monetize connectors. So the ability to sort of meter transactions within an Anypoint Studio connector, as part of like maybe a batch integration or something. As an aside, in addition to kind of the API kind of gateway ecosystem support, like I mentioned, we have a full REST API, and we actually also have an SDK or SDKs that we publish from that API. So if you have customers who potentially aren't using a gateway or need a bridge to using an API gateway and might have like Node.js or Spring Boot apps, we have a servlet filter we built for Spring Boot, and then similar functionality for Node.js that lets you monetize an API without necessarily having an investment in an API gateway. And then finally, and this is, I didn't realize that there was the next presentation in this meetup is about event-driven architecture, but we also have the ability to meter event streams. So specifically, if you have customers using Anypoint MQ or um, syndicating data with something like Kafka, we have the ability to plug into those and then monetize event streams. Frankly, that this is more, I'm not seeing a lot of this right now, but it is coming up in kind of some of our conversations. Now what I'll do is I'll jump into just one of these APIs so you can get a sense of how they're configured. This particular API, I believe this was synchronized from the Anypoint platform, so the version and the URL is the dummy URL for this one, but these were pulled in from my Anypoint demo account. You can see here that assets can be associated to products, and I'll jump over to the product configuration in a second. You have the ability to tag assets, and this tagging comes into play most significantly when you're writing the dynamic pricing rules, because you can look at these tags and then vary the price based on how an API is tagged or not. We also have the ability to bring in an external ID, so that this allows you to tie, potentially an asset into like the API ID and the Anypoint platform for auto discovery or something to that effect. Okay. Now, when I go into products, so I probably wasn't clear about this before, but I think Jason was. So our platform lets you take multiple API assets and then bundle those into products. So a product in HyperCurrent can consist of one or more assets. So you can see here, this particular API has 4 assets that are part of, sorry, this particular product has 4 APIs that are part of it. You could also have sub-products. So you can, make a product of products or assets, and then, basically, like, again, bundles of things that downstream people can buy. And then products also have SLA definitions associated with them optionally. So now let me just dig into this. Again, so, product name is the version. We support different sorts of transaction types. So in terms of out-of-the-box transaction types, there's support for transactional APIs, or sorry, transactional products. So these are products that are billed on a per call basis. We have subscription subscription transaction type. So this is a recurring charge against access to a product. We have a one-time charge, which is just when someone procures access, they get charged once, and then essentially they don't get charged again until that their access expires. And then this one, which is Hovered, is something new coming in the release we're doing this month, where it's a combination of subscription and transactional charges. So this means you can apply a recurring subscription fee, which includes a certain amount of transactions, and then define the overage rate for that transaction. Like I mentioned, in addition to the out-of-the-box pricing, we can also apply dynamic pricing rules. So I wrote a rule here that will discount the product's cost if it's used off business hours. So the idea here is that as an organization, you might want to encourage people to use APIs off hours, where presumably there's less load and less impact to internal systems of record. You can see here this product has 4 assets associated with it. I don't have any SLA definitions defined, so there's nothing there. You have the ability to, or our platform has the ability to send notifications when different things happen. So for a product, for instance, if someone registers for it, or if things expire, then you can set arbitrary notification addresses here, so people in an organization can be alerted when things happen. This piece also supports non-email notifications, so things like Slack as well. And then finally, there's tagging support on products as well. Now, once you've defined a bunch of products on HyperCurrent, people can, obviously get access to that. So kind of putting the kind of automated kind of provisioning from ACM aside, if I go to the product keys page here, I can see all the product keys that have been issued to different API clients within this particular organization. If I go and look at one of the product keys, you can see the product keys associated with a client. You can associate potentially multiple products with a product key. Actually, this particular product, actually, this is a bad one. Some of the transaction types don't let you mix products together. I of course picked the one that doesn't let you do that. But if I go in here, you can see that I can associate multiple products with a product key. As part of this release as well, we've introduced support for associating applications with a product key. So this essentially means that if there's applications in the Anypoint platform, and these ones have been auto-synchronized from my Anypoint account, these applications can be associated with this product key. And then instead of the user passing a dedicated HyperCurrent header into their requests, we can piggyback on the client ID header and soon to be the JWT header on API requests, and use those to correlate essentially an application to a product in HyperCurrent. The value here is that an organization buying access to a bundle of APIs, they're likely to do that once, but then distribute that key across the organization to different application developers who need it. So that this feature allows us to support that. You could also add pricing rules to product keys. So for instance, if you wanted to give someone a discount for a product key, like maybe you get them a month for free, you can write a pricing rule to do that. And then you can associate that pricing rule with the API, or sorry, with the product key. Again, notification support in this part of the platform as well. So you can send, in addition to the person getting access to the product key, also have additional notification addresses on creation. We have the ability to send notifications out if someone's reaching their quota. So if you optionally set a quota, you might want to say when someone gets to 90% of the quota that they've used, you want to let them know. So that person can go and potentially, buy a bigger subscription tier, or potentially notify a business or salesperson on the producer side to go reach out to that customer proactively and try to upgrade their subscription. And then product keys also support expiration dates, and you can associate external quote IDs from something like Salesforce CPQ with the product key as well. Okay, now
Hey, John and Juliana, I just was going to do a quick time check. I can't remember. Are we four more minutes, or are we 1 minute over? No, we're close.
No, you've got another 5 minutes. Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry, John.
Yeah, so let me just flip over. Actually, let me show you this quickly. So again, these are pricing rules, so low code environment to dynamically alter price. So again, in 5 lines of code here, I can basically give a 50% discount if someone's using an API off hours. Just quickly now jumping into, I lost my window, of course, jumping into ACM. So this is ACM. This is a demo site that we're building for a financial organization. If I go here, you can see that we have our HyperCurrent LWCs, and there's a bunch of them here that I alluded to in the prior part of the conversation. And then configuring this stuff is really easy. So if I go to the product carousel here, you essentially I select the organization, which is equivalent to a business group in our platform, and then I can basically define what the presentation of in this case, the product carousel looks like. Final piece quickly. So now just jumping onto the Anypoint platform, I will show you the custom policy and how that looks. All right, so if I move over to policies, I can go to the HyperCurrent metering policy. And then, this is super easy to configure. So the only required field is the asset ID. Like I mentioned before, we're introducing support to actually determine this dynamically. So in which case there'll be essentially 0 configuration for this policy. You can essentially use a data weave expression to set which response codes to meter, right? So in this case, I only want to charge people for 200 series requests. There's the product key expression that lets you determine what our product key is from the Mule message. Again, it's data weave. And then, like I mentioned, if you're using applications, then we can automatically infer this from the client ID. Final piece I'll just touch on is the metadata expression. So this allows you to capture arbitrary metadata from the Mule message and use that to charge the customer. So for instance, one of the customers that we're working with, they're charging based on metadata around in the API payload, specifically the character count within an API request. So this allows them to write, again, a simple data weave expression to surface that data as a line item in HyperCurrent. So with that, I'm going to stop, and Jason, I'll hand it back to you to wrap up.
Thanks, John. I think we can just wrap up verbally. Another call for questions if there are any. And like I said, Julie, I don't know if you normally send the slides out afterwards. I'll make sure you have a copy you can distribute to the group. And otherwise, if you guys have questions afterwards, please find us on LinkedIn. Happy to talk more.
Yeah, so thanks, John, and thanks, Jason, for that. I really do think it's a really interesting space, and hence me kind of being quite attracted to it. And I think for me, it's something that will happen in 2022 now, but also in 2022. And I think definitely we're starting to see, from my perspective in the Asia market, more relevant need for it, given the start of our conversation earlier in the presentation. So so I think it's a really great technology that you guys are building there, and neatly integrated into the MuleSoft kind of ecosystem and platform ecosystem, which I think is really keen to see. I will invite other people, so if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat box, as I said. Couple of questions from me, maybe, just to kick things off. So in terms of platform levels and support, so what are the key, I saw API Manager there, so what are the key mandatory components in MuleSoft that are kind of really needed to be there in order to support the platform? API Manager, base API Manager.
Yeah, the base levels API Manager, even then, if you're using our SDK, then the API Manager is not necessarily necessary. So that could be a bridge to someone to buying an API Manager, frankly. But that's the only required piece. The other stuff is all optional, like ACM and CPQ.
Okay, got it. And then in terms of environments, this is fully SaaS, is it, or can you go on-prem, or how is it all packaged up?
It's our preferred deployment model is fully SaaS, so that we 100% support on-premise as well, and a hybrid of the two.
Okay.
But yeah, the SaaS is our preferred model.
Yeah. And then in terms of that, the integration and back into other people's or other companies, your clients' technologies for maybe invoicing and stuff like that. How does that kind of administrative element happen, if that makes sense? Because you've got kind of the product engine, which does all the configuration. You clearly got the monitoring of all the requests, but then how do those two things tie back together to say, hey, Mr. Customer, you now owe me some cash, or the internal people?
Great questions. So there's in-platform configuration, which is trivial to export invoice data periodically to like an S3 bucket or a file system as CSV or XML. That's frankly how most of the customers that we're talking to want to see the data, so they can integrate it with their own internal procurement and settlement processes. But that said, we're also working with organizations that are using the out-of-the-box integration we're building to Stripe. So that's what we were releasing this month. And then the things aren't mutually exclusive either. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I would just say, surprisingly, Julian and everyone, we're working with some really big customers where you would think they want everything to go into their system to manage invoicing. But a lot of that, because monetization is nascent, even in big organizations, it's like a pilot project, and the big ERP is saying, we don't want to know anything about it. Just you guys do it all with HyperCurrent. And if it's successful, we'll worry about it fully integrating with the big ERP system. So that's been a surprise for us. We've had to extend further than we thought into the invoicing arena.
Interesting. Yeah, everyone kind of doing it under the radar and before having to get the old legacy guys involved and in some modern stuff. Okay, very good. Any other questions, Royston? Any other questions from yourself?
Nothing in particular. I just wanted to add a comment. I've seen some of the work that HyperCurrent has done presented by Stephen Fishman and Dan Hendrick. So it's good to hear it directly from you guys, and appreciate you taking the time and effort to share this out in the morning.
No problem.
You bet. Thanks for inviting us, Julian.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. So for everyone's reference, so if you send the slides over, Jason, and they'll go up on SlideShare, and they'll also be presented for backup onto the Meetup group, and video recording of the session as well will be made available there as well. So everyone's got it back for reference. And and then if anyone's got any questions for the guys, please feel free to get in contact with them as well.
Cool.
Okay, very good. So once again, thanks guys for taking the time. Ken, you're up next. Do you want me to present from my slides?
I can present from mine. If that would be easier.
Sure enough. Okay.
Yep.
You go for it.
Okay. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay.
See your stuff. Okay.
Okay. Hey everybody. So I'm Ken Chang. I'm from MuleSoft Professional Services, technical architect based out of Hong Kong. For some reason, my team loves volunteering me for the holiday meetup. You know, it's starting to become a trend if it happens, you know, more than once. So for today, you know, I'll be talking about the Salesforce kind of event-driven architecture, specifically involving Salesforce Platform Events, and as well as how we can connect that into MuleSoft's you know, integration platform, using MuleSoft as a way to further extend the event-driven architecture that you might have on Salesforce, and possibly incorporating it into your enterprise event-driven you know, patterns. So you know, as we all know, yeah, I won't spend too much time on the initial slides, right? Event-driven architecture on Salesforce, these platform events were released, I believe, back in 2017. And you know, lately I've been finding that more and more customers are starting to use Salesforce Platform Events alongside their other enterprise EDA solution, such as Kafka, for example. You know, that's probably the most common one that everybody knows. And, you know, as we know, these days with all the different types of integrations that you have to do for an enterprise, especially those large multinational enterprises, right? You have all kinds of data that you have to synchronize between your different systems of record. For instance, you have your customer data, you have your, you know, quotation, order data, billing information, so on and so forth. You have to connect your mobile app to your, you know, backend billing systems, for instance, right? And these things are just not that easily done through the traditional kind of request-driven model, right? So some of the customers that I've been working with, you know, have started to look seriously at building up their event-driven capabilities so that, for example, when events happen on their mobile app or events happen on Salesforce, they would like to then be able to pass the information, you know, back and forth. Perhaps when order information come in from a mobile app, they can enter that detail into their Salesforce organization, and then subsequently, you know, adding some kind of order tracking into their data lake, for example. Yeah, so there's really a lot of different things that needs to be done with integration, which you know, event-driven type of architecture can come in handy. And this is probably like, you know, the standard MuleSoft slide that a lot of you have seen in the past, right? You know, with MuleSoft, point-to-point integrations is one of the problems that we're trying to help customers solve. So now for Salesforce, you know, the proposition with an event-driven like event bus based on platform events is it's really the same kind of proposition, right? You want to eliminate these kind of very, very messy point-to-point integrations, you know, where your SAP, AWS, Heroku, Oracle, you know, legacy systems have to connect to your Salesforce through these very brittle point-to-point integrations. You know, the idea is to avoid that jumble of red line mess in the upper right-hand corner, right? And this is where platform events and kind of Salesforce change data capture comes in. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between these two. But in, you know, there are these two primary concepts on Salesforce is what you would use to implement an event-driven architecture in Salesforce, right? And the some of the advantages are things such as it allows you to do real-time integration across your business processes. And you can augment your data with event-driven workflow. So for example, if you have experience doing Salesforce Lightning Flow or Process Builder, you'll be able to create an event publishing flow using that. You can also keep your external systems synced to your Salesforce data whenever data changes. So for example, if a customer's contact information changes or the customer master data changes, those things can be propagated into MuleSoft and then subsequently pushed onto any on-premise system that you might have, right? And there are additional features that are being released by Salesforce, every year, right? One of the kind of the hottest new things is the Salesforce functions, this serverless function that you can implement to give you event-driven access to elastic computing resources. So now coming back to Salesforce Platform Events, what are they exactly? So if you are a little bit familiar with Salesforce, core, you would know that Salesforce, the standard objects that we operate on are these kind of Salesforce standard objects, and also you can define custom objects. So when it comes to Salesforce Platform Events, they are really defined in the same way as Salesforce custom objects, right? And then what you can do then is you can set up different types of services in Salesforce or through external services to either publish or subscribe to the Salesforce Platform Events. So in terms of publishing, there's 3 key things you can do. So you can use Process Builder to publish an event. You can use Apex code to publish an event, right? And then, obviously there's kind of pointing and clicking that you can set up to create your platform events and use the Salesforce Platform API to publish your events, okay? And then in terms of subscribing, subscription is more or less similar. You can use Salesforce Platform APIs, Process Builder, or you could use Apex triggers to subscribe to events, okay? So that's really a very quick high-level overview of Salesforce Platform Events and what you can do in order to produce the events and consume the events, right? And if there's one takeaway from this presentation, it's that we want to try to encourage customers to move away from the point-to-point type of integration and to move towards a more robust decoupled model. Decoupled and having a decoupled architecture really allows you to a number of benefits, right? So for example, you'll be able to scale your own internal systems more effectively, right? The producers no longer have to worry about which consumers are subscribing to the events, right? So you can take a fire and forget approach, publish your events, and then you simply assume that someone out there who cares about these events will consume them, right? And every one of the systems that's attached to the events can be scaled independently of each other, right? Because there's no tight coupling involved. So here this on this current slide, it summarizes again. There's 3 ways to publish the events, right? Through Salesforce APIs, Apex, and Process Builder. And then subscriptions are, if you're consuming events, then you can consume events via Salesforce API through Comedy, the bio protocol. And then, you can extend events further with MuleSoft. And it's really this MuleSoft part that I would like to kind of spend a little bit more time talking about today. So from a real-time integration perspective, when Salesforce, whenever data is created or changed on Salesforce, as I mentioned before, you have the users have the ability to create platform events on Salesforce, right? So you can create these platform events as custom objects, or you can simply turn on the change data capture for a particular object, standard object or a custom object, right? And then through the MuleSoft kind of connectors, which connects to the Salesforce event bus, you can then be notified of any changes that has happened to your Salesforce object. So in this particular example, let's say that on Salesforce, a customer's contact information was changed, right? It would then go, the change would be pushed and published into the Salesforce event bus. The MuleSoft connector, which subscribes to the event, will pick up on this particular event change, right? And then it will know that, for example, if this was a customer contact, I need to update the SAP customer information. So I can push that change through one of the MuleSoft system API calls and update SAP, right? Let's say that on Salesforce, you have a contact change for an internal team member, for example, right? We can have perhaps a second workflow where we subscribe to the internal team member change and then publish that information into that team member's Workday account, right? Similarly for databases, I mean, you can connect, whatever systems you want to MuleSoft, and that's really the beauty of having MuleSoft as kind of an integration. What I'm calling kind of our event-driven API model in this particular case. So we're able to subscribe to all the Salesforce platform event changes and then use that information to very effectively update, customer on-premise systems of record or their cloud systems. And really, the opposite also works, right? So for example, if you have changes happening on the customer end, we have the ability through the MuleSoft connector to push data back into Salesforce, right? And then have Salesforce components such as Apex triggers that are listening to specific events, pick up on SAP data changes, for example. So the interaction can go both ways. And when it comes to change data capture, right? This is really probably the easiest way for you to keep your data changes in sync with your own external systems, right? The non-Salesforce systems. Currently, for Salesforce Platform Events, the retention period is by default 24 hours. So there's a concept of high volume events, which has a longer retention period of 72 hours. Please note that this is quite different from kind of Kafka configuration. I think, by a lot of clients that I've worked with, their Kafka configuration, they usually will retain events for longer periods, for example, 7 days. And then building, when you build event-driven apps, right? MuleSoft is really one of the pieces. So now with Salesforce Platform Events and the event bus, you can now push data to all kinds of different components and applications in your technical stack. So for example, Lightning Web Components can subscribe to the events, obviously MuleSoft. You can build up your flows, and then you can use the Comedy client to keep additional systems. If you wanted to, skip MuleSoft and do a direct integration, you could do that as well. Yeah, so there are lots of different ways for you to get event-driven apps, up and running using the Salesforce Platform Event plus MuleSoft, right? And one of the things that I would say is that for customers who are really interested in developing asynchronous workflows, right, like the event-driven architecture, it is the easiest way to get a reliable, if kind of asynchronous workflow up and running, right? Because as I mentioned before, you can take a fire and forget approach, right? You fire an event, and then you can perform this kind of event choreography, we call it in EDA patterns, to orchestrate whatever you choreograph, whatever you want to do. Let's say you have an order settlement system, you can then choreograph the entire event-driven flow from Salesforce into your on-premise systems, for instance, right? Since we're talking about Salesforce, I think it's important to note, like, they say that one of the best things in life is, the best things in life are usually free. I think in the case of Salesforce, the best things in life are, those things where we are able to get working under the Salesforce governor limit. For anyone who has worked with Salesforce, you'll know that there are a lot of Salesforce governor limits that to be aware of, right? I'll share this slide later, but I won't go into too much of the details. But it's important to know that from a platform perspective, the MuleSoft API, that whenever MuleSoft picks up on a Salesforce Platform Event, or any other external system picks up on an event, this is considered a delivered event, and these events have the shortest, lowest amount of Salesforce governor limits, and so this is something to be aware of, right? And so typically for customers on the Enterprise Edition license, there's only 25,000 delivery per 24 hours, right? And if you think about all the different types of workflows you can do, it's rather limited. So if you have a lot of point-to-point integrations, that will seriously eat into your Salesforce governor limits. So the advantage of having MuleSoft in this case then is if MuleSoft picks up on the event, right, you only have to deliver it to one place. And then MuleSoft has the ability to help you propagate that event downstream to other systems. So now you no longer require, you're no longer eating into your Salesforce platform event limits. Moving on, I think that from a high level perspective, right, REST APIs really do work quite well with event-driven architecture. I think there's a case to be made for using event-driven, for asynchronous workflows. Obviously, on the right-hand side column, you see that event-driven as a reactive model has a lot of benefits like loose coupling, scalability, fault tolerance, right? These are all things that are more or less, accepted kind of conventional wisdom for event-driven architecture. On the other hand, REST APIs still are very important to the organization, right? They're very flexible and lightweight. They're stateless. In some sense, you do have client and server decoupling, and if you were executing transactions that have complex orchestration, sometimes it's easiest to monitor these type of operations through a request-driven approach rather than through an event-driven approach. You can just imagine that if you were stringing together, let's say a long chain of transactions, trying to choreograph that using the event-driven approach is going to be, difficult to keep track of, to say the least. Yeah, so on this slide, when would we usually use REST APIs versus kind of EDAs? As I already mentioned, I think synchronous request response is obvious candidate for REST APIs, whereas asynchronous, use an event-driven approach, right? When we have complex orchestrations, obviously I think for REST APIs built on top of MuleSoft, you really have the ability to see all of your code logic in one place and to analyze that and to understand, what your transaction or what your business logic is. But if you're doing that on an event-driven architecture, it's a lot tougher to monitor. It's not that you can't do it, but it requires a certain amount of developer discipline to do that well for event-driven architecture. Another, kind of key difference between REST versus EDA is that, with REST APIs, if you require kind of strong consistency, obviously go with REST. But if you only require eventual consistency, where you know that the data will eventually be correct, then you can use EDA, right? And finally, like schedule and forget jobs are one of the most obvious candidates for EDA. I think one thing to keep in mind when using Salesforce Platform Events is that error detection and recovery is a very important topic in terms of using EDA patterns, right? So if you were implementing MuleSoft with Salesforce Platform Events, you have the ability to indicate the kind of event replay that you want. So for example, if you there's really 3 key values here that you can specify. So the first one is, you go with the current event ID that you have already played, so that when the flow continues, if your application were to stop for any reason and then resume later, it would use the last value it kept track of in the MuleSoft object store to replay the event. You can also specify a value of -1. So in case of -1, it would skip over all the old events, but only process any new events that come in, right? And if you wanted to replay all of the retained events, basically all events within the retention window, you can specify a value of -2 to replay all of your Salesforce Platform Events. So there are a few settings that you can play with, and this gives you different choices in terms of how you design your event-driven API workflow. So like I mentioned before, there's a couple of different models. I won't go into too much detail, but basically you can set up an event, as a response to, let's say, Salesforce contacts being updated. Or another approach, which I've seen at a recent customer, is they created this event synchronization API where they directly take the Salesforce event and then insert it into their on-premise Kafka system. So in this way, we're simply propagating the event from Salesforce directly into Kafka, so that all of their on-premise systems simply subscribe to their Kafka cluster, and then they're able to then benefit from Salesforce events that are published, and then all the on-premise systems can consume the Salesforce platform events. So this is one way where Salesforce then becomes a part of a bigger enterprise event-driven model. Alternatively, right, the event handler approach on the right-hand side just allows you to directly respond to Salesforce event updates, and then you can take, contact or customer master data updates and directly synchronize that into your SAP system or whatever other system of record that you're working with. And then on the flip side of things, right, one common pattern that I've seen in 2 customers recently is that they have mobile applications that would like to and that pushes out event data, and then they would like to synchronize these kind of event data into their Salesforce SAP and all their kind of backend systems of record. So the mobile applications, right, can publish events through a mobile API to the Kafka event bus, right, which then does a similar type of event propagation to all their backend systems, right? So there's definitely different things you can do. Events can travel both ways from Salesforce out to all the external applications and systems, or they can go the other way and travel from the external applications and systems back into Salesforce, right? Is really fairly powerful. So in that sense, Salesforce become like fully integrated into the enterprise event-driven architecture. Yeah, so I think that more or less covers, a high-level overview of event-driven architecture inside Salesforce based on platform events and change data capture, and how you can use MuleSoft to further extend your enterprise EDA patterns. So a few references for those who are interested. You can go onto Salesforce, and we have a lot of great modules on Trailhead to help you with your own kind of Salesforce event-driven journey. You can learn all about the basics, pick up some badges along the way. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Thanks for that. Much appreciated. Let's send in the chat box if you have any questions for Ken. Please put them down in the chat box and ask away. Royce, any questions from yourself? Well, I'll ask a few of Ken.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few people who have questions around Salesforce integrations, but the one thing I encounter probably most often is governor limits, Ken. So I know you mentioned it earlier, but would you have any generalist advice as to how you've dealt with governor limits and proactively staying on top of it?
Yeah, so when it comes to Salesforce governor limits, I think in my most recent client engagement, I had to spend a lot of time, explaining governor limits to the client to ensure that they understand, every API call they make and, can eat into their governor limits, right? So they cannot build everything on top of Salesforce Platform Events. I think that's one of the biggest challenges I had to deal with, because EDA is so easy to do. You just it's one of the easiest ways for you to capture Salesforce data changes and immediately propagate that to downstream systems. That everyone wanted to do it, but then the customer license simply didn't support that. I suppose it's great for Salesforce in that customer then decided to buy more licenses, but we had to urge them to kind of consider other architecture approaches, to save on the governor limits. For example, pushing the data to MuleSoft API, having a reliability pattern there, right, so that you can queue up these changes and then potentially processing the changes one by one instead of using Salesforce platform events for every single integration that they have, right? So it's I think the challenge is really educating developers and making sure that they understand there is a governor limits there, and then you have to talk with the other teams to coordinate, who actually gets to consume those limits.
Ken?
So we have a question from Murali. I'm sure you can see it, Ken, but AMQ can suffice as Salesforce Event Bus, or is there any reason to introduce another event messenger?
Yeah, I think that you can definitely use queues for Salesforce events, right? But I think that the advantage of using Salesforce Platform Events is that it's one of those built-in features, and it's really super easy to use, and it comes with great tutorials. So like I mentioned before, I mean, when we introduced this concept, the customer who had a lot of difficulty understanding slightly more complicated request-driven APIs, immediately picked up on how to use the Salesforce Platform Events. I think similarly, maybe event queues can work as well, but I feel that the replay capability, right, when you implement events on MuleSoft, and integrating it with Salesforce Platform Events, right? You have the ability to use replay IDs to kind of recover any messages that you may have missed, or to ensure that all the messages are delivered properly. So, personally, I haven't used AMQ much, but I just feel that a lot of the developers, really take to Salesforce Platform Events, especially if they're quite new to Salesforce for the first time, and then they pick up on this topic very, very quickly. Whereas the queuing, it's a little different, and I think the underlying concepts, seem to be, you're right, Murali. I think AMQs can suffice, right? But platform events are just so easy and so well integrated into Salesforce that for those working on Salesforce, seems to be a no-brainer.
So is there any other questions? Please keep them coming. I think for me on event-driven architecture, I think it's another, let's say, trend that's going to be very present in 2022. We had a session earlier in the year actually with Kafka, and I think I've got the Solace guys knocking down the front door to try and present here as well, and showing their capabilities for EDA. For me, actually, it's starting to come a little bit like 180 in terms of modern kind of web architecture. We very much have gone down that kind of web service, synchronous web service route, over the last, I don't know, let's say 5 to 10 years. And very much those request reply stuff. And whereas if I think back into integration, within the enterprise as well, maybe 15 years ago or even 20 years ago when I started, it was all pretty much event-based, right? It was all kind of fire forget type stuff and multiple routing across the business. And so I think we're sort of coming back to that space again now. And so it'd be interesting to see how it's now picked up a lot in the context also of not just enterprise integration, but also in the context of, end user events from whether that be, mobile apps or Salesforce or whatever. So again, another customer that we're working with is looking at how they take events and requests are actually coming in from heavy use mobile app, and then using those events to push into using Kafka in this instance to push into kind of like a real-time marketing analytics platform, and then they can in real time then push those offers and stuff back up to the or near real time, should I say, back up to the users of the mobile apps to then kind of generate the I don't know, like next best offers and stuff like this. So it's definitely an area which, again, like I said, will gain more and more traction in 2022. Sure.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You mentioned Solace. That's another platform where we have seen customers use in my recent engagement. So Kafka and Solace are definitely some of the more popular event-driven choices out there.
And I guess for just to wrap this up, and then just in terms of technical considerations, I guess, and to Murali's question around AMQ, and then for those who don't know, I think at the moment, maybe Royston or even Ken, so AMQ is only really available on Cloud Hub implementations or hybrid as well, just Cloud Hub, correct?
Assuming AMQ here is Anypoint MQ and not Active MQ. It is
Right.
It is hosted on Cloud Hub.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
We do have some customers who actually deploy on-prem and use Anypoint MQ on cloud, but the vast majority use it on Cloud Hub. But it's only hosted on cloud when it's Anypoint MQ.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Ken. I think that's no more questions. That wraps up that topic. So thank you very much. Much appreciated. So Royston, I'm going to hand over to you. Is my screen showing here?
It's just that I can see presenter view over here. I'll have to switch that around.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Let me change this. Always happens every time. Any better?
That works perfectly now. Thank you. All right. So thank you once again, Ken, for your presentation. Just have a few updates to share with the community here, things to keep on top of, and relevant announcements. So the first one is that we had the MuleSoft Transform event last week, which is what with us. If you missed the session, I highly recommend you catch it on demand. So that's mulesoft.com/transform. There are a number of product announcements made, including MuleSoft Composer, the Anypoint Flex Gateway, as well as API governance. So there's a new style of event. One of the highlights was there was actually opportunity to speak directly with the product managers for a number of different parts of the platform. So if you missed it this time around, catch the recording. But I believe our next major event will probably be around between March and May next year, with either the Connect or the Summit series. All right, next slide, please. All right, so just some feature announcements on the platform. So for many of you who are using IDPs for single sign-on, so I know Azure AD and Okta is quite popular in this space. There is now a feature in the platform to actually add multiple IDPs for single sign-on. So the reason this is useful is that we have some customers and users who have multiple IDPs in their organization. So you might have finance using something and IT using something else, or you might have just a different IDP for test versus prod. So you now have the ability to configure access through multiple IDPs. So it's not something you have to use, however, it is available if you want to. All right, moving on. All right, so just wanted to shed some light on MuleSoft Composer. This is something you will see talked about in the Transform event from last week. If you have not heard about Composer, it is a new citizen integration tool. So it's targeted at a slightly different audience. However, it still uses the Mule runtime under the hood as well. So I strongly encourage you to just learn a little bit more about it, because you will have people at some point asking you questions as members of the MuleSoft community. If you move on to the next slide, you'll actually see there are some enablement resources that are linked. So this one talks about connectors. So out of the box, we have connectors to a number of systems, including the ones on screen. The focus here is to have a lot of dragging and dropping integration as opposed to opening up Anypoint Studio and having to configure flows. So it's even simpler than using Anypoint Studio. It's targeted more at the business analyst or the line of business user. Next slide, please, June. All right, so we have documentation published on the website, and there are also 5 mini courses that you can use to learn a little bit about MuleSoft Composer as well. So if anyone is super interested, that's the place to go to get started. All right, moving on, please. Okay, and one more slide. So with meetups, you already are at a meetup, but I do want to shout out that we've launched a higher education meetup group, which has a meetup tomorrow. So if you want to double back-to-back meetups on 2 days, there's an option for you. This one's targeted more towards university students. So if you know anyone in that space, maybe you've got some family or friends, that could be one way to get introduced to MuleSoft. We also have a number of other MuleSoft groups that are running meetups throughout December, including the online meetup group, which is running a meetup next week. So the link to keep in mind is meetups.mulesoft.com/events to keep on top of all the meetups coming. All right, next slide, please. All right, so moving on to the hackathon. So some of you might know that there was a MuleSoft hackathon that took place recently. The good news is that the winners of the hackathon have been announced, and all of their projects are available to actually review, including how to reproduce it. So congratulations to FoodShare, who won first place. And the second place prize actually was a team from Japan. So we have someone from Asia who won the position as well. So if you're interested in what they did, there is a blog post which has all the information, and that's just a screenshot from the blog post that I just posted here. All right, next slide, please. And moving on to the next slide. So just with the Friends of Max topics, so we have some new videos in Friends of Max for November. So these are short, sharp videos, just giving us enablement on useful topics that all of us tend to be interested in. So there's actually topic number 3 on the right-hand side that says Salesforce integration with MuleSoft connectors. So that might be of interest to many of you who are interested in Ken's presentation. So have a look at these. To watch the videos, you can click on the links on the slide once they're published. All of them are also available in the MuleSoft videos channel or on MuleSoft YouTube as well. There are 2 options for it. One more thing, for anyone who has work applications deployed on Cloud Hub, there is a video on the left-hand side, the second one, simulating Cloud Hub workers. That has been created by a member of our support team who is an expert in this space. If you'd like to understand how you can simulate Cloud Hub workers on your Anypoint Studio, especially for performance tuning, I recommend that video. All right, I think that should be the end of my slides. Back to you, Jeremy.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you for that, Royston. And I think there's some good events. Keep an eye, like I say, keep an eye out for those meetups that are coming. I mean, they're coming thick and fast, but coming to the end of the year also. So, but next year again, there will be again many to come. I think the virtual format has, like I said at the start of this session, it's become quite popular and enable a lot more people to get access to content from across the world. So keep an eye out for those, as Royston said. Okay, so before we just wrap up, we're kind of 2 minutes late or so. So 2 questions, brain teasers. Maybe Royston, if you could just monitor the chat box, as I cannot see the chat box in the presenter mode. So yeah, so if first correct answers on these next 2 questions. So one is a question of the day, and then the second one is a bit of a Christmas themed brain teaser for you. Okay, so the first question, which is question of the day, coming up. So yeah, so Royston, it'd be the first answers, correct answers, more to the point, not just the first answers, and hopefully it rewards those who are here early. So the question is, other than API monetization, what other trend or trends the HyperCurrent team seeing being big in 2022?
I'm monitoring the chat. We haven't had anything come through. All right, I think I've seen my first correct answer. So congratulations, Ashok. He's answered correctly with API security.
Excellent, well done, Ashok. So maybe also just a quick note to those who, so to those who are answering, if you can just drop myself and Royston an email via the Meetup site or whatever, just send me your email addresses, because Royston and I don't see those on your registration. So yeah, if you can send those to us, and then we'll get your prize and vouchers in the post, as it were, the electronic post. Okay, on to the next one. And this is kind of a bit of a brain teaser, just to awaken your mind at this time. So there's a picture of a skiing snowman coming up. So which shadow matches the snowman that you see as a Christmas theme? There you go, it's coming up now. And if you write the number of the snowman in the chat box, and then winning first answer will get the prizes. How good's your eyesight? Oh, sorry, as well. You need to know which one it is.
Right. I think I have seen the first correct answer. So Julian, just confirming the correct answer is 3.
There you go. Yes, it
Yes,
is number
it is.
3.
All
It's
right.
number 3.
So we have Emmanuel, I believe, is the first person. So Emmanuel Christian Ubelida, congratulations. You've won your prize.
Very good. Maybe maybe it's Christmas, we may do the first 3 maybe on that one. Yeah.
All right. We've got that right as well. So
Very good.
Yeah.
I think you got 3
Yeah.
answers. Yeah.
So we have 3 people who answered 3 right next to
good.
each other.
Excellent. Well done. Well done. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining today. It's been a long year, I think, for maybe most still in lockdown still. So hopefully everyone has remained safe. I'm sure everyone is probably looking for some form of a break over the Christmas period, and then looking into, or maybe Chinese New Year is probably the next big festival in this region. In I don't know when it is, maybe late January, early February. So we will be back probably around March time, so keep a lookout for that. And maybe for those who are still on the call, it'll be good. Sorry, Royce, I'm going to ask you maybe to maybe enable a few people, see if we can get a picture. Again, we always try to get a picture at the end, but it does require people to be in presenter mode. Even if I get your avatars, maybe. But if people do want to switch your cameras on, and maybe we do try and get a picture.
So for everyone on the call, I'm
Final
just
meetup of the year.
promoting you to presenter mode. So if you can, turn on your video, and then we'll be able to see you.
Hey Ashok, good to see you. Good to see a face to a name.
Yeah.
See if we can get anyone
Great
else.
session, Ken. Thank you. It's really helpful. So I have been working on MuleSoft around 3 years. So yeah, thank you. And advance Christmas here.
Everyone else is so shy. So maybe next time. So if there are no more questions, please, thank you again. Or sorry, not please. Thank you again for your time. Thanks for joining. And thank you again for Ken. Thank you again for the guys from HyperCurrent. And all of the slides will be put up on the MuleSoft or up on the Meetup page. And I'll also be sending out an email with all the links and everything for you to pick up that content. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And keep safe, and see you next year. Believe it or not.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Thank you, Royce.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.